Welcome everyone to today's business meeting for the City Council. We're going to start the meeting off with an invocation, and here to do that for us today is Greg Dow from Central Church of Christ. Greg?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity to lead the prayer this afternoon. Let's bow. Lord, we come before you today with honest hearts. We are struggling in the middle of a long pandemic. We all know families who have been impacted by this virus. Some have suffered death, some have experienced illness, some have endured economic loss. Father, please have mercy on these families. This afternoon, Father, we turn to your prophet Habakkuk, who said, "The righteous will live by faith." When storms arise, we live by faith. When hardships come, we live by faith. When injustice occurs, we live by faith. When we are confused, overwhelmed, and exhausted, we live by faith. As our city leaders meet today, I ask that you give them faith. May they trust in your wisdom, your discernment, and your guidance. And may you fill them with courage, hope, and peace. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Greg, thank you so much for making time to be here today.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Sure. We'll move on to the next portion of the meeting, and that is public address. Stephanie, do we have anyone signed up for public address today?
I'm confirming with Francis, but I don't believe we do, Mayor.
We do not.
Okay, thank you, ladies. Item 1A on the agenda is to review the agenda, any of the attachments. Are there any questions or anything in the meeting attachments from the council that we need further explanation on before we touch each item?
Okay. Give me 1 second. I think there may have been one, maybe.
Okay, sure.
Let me go back through real quick. I'm just still trying to kind of catch up. No, I think it's all later. Okay, I'm fine.
Okay.
Thank
Anybody
you.
else? Okay, then. Let's move on to item 1B, the coronavirus update. Mr. City Manager?
Right. To do the coronavirus update today, we're going to have a couple of different staff members speaking. We're going to have Casey Stoughton, as we have routinely had, Director of Public Health. We'll also go from there to our Interim Director of Community Development on temporary assignment from the Police Department, Jason Riddlesberger. And I need to check with Andrew and or Dr. Sauer to see if they have any updates on.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then Dr. Sauer will take some time to present as well. So with that said, and then we'll also answer questions from all council members. So Casey Stoughton, please take it away.
Great, thank you. So as of today, there were a total of 6,068 cases of COVID-19 reported in Potter and Randall counties. And Stephanie has the report card today, so she can put that up on the screen for you to see. So there's a total of 6,068 cases of COVID-19 reported in Potter and Randall counties today. 3,966 in Potter County, 1,102 in Randall County. We have a total of 5,539 recoveries, and are an increase to 84 deaths here in our community. And we're, like the pastor said, you know, we have been touched by each of these situations, and you know, I think we have all been touched by these situations, and so we're with each death that we have noted. That leaves us with 445 active cases on our case count today. Each of the cases do represent a unique individual, and staff out duplicate tests is to not count multiple tests for the same person. The public health drive-through does remain operational. So far, we've tested just over 7,000 individuals in our community. So we're very pleased with the staff and the hard work that the staff have done there at the testing center. Hospital capacity today notes 40 patients in the hospitals. That's down previous reports, and so we have fewer patients in the hospital this week. The hospitalization rate is steady at about 8.9%. Adult bed utilization is at 69%. Ventilator use is at 41.5%, and ICU utilization is at 73.5%. Public Health is participating in a clinical research study with Dr. Milton and Dr. Sigler at Texas Tech and PharmaTex Research. We're researching or working with them to recruit research candidates researching the anti-spike monoclonal antibody. And so we're really excited to be part of this research project with them and recruiting research study candidates. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So Casey, on the hospitalization rate, that is specifically for COVID-19 patients, right?
Yes, ma'am. That would be the number of COVID-19 patients divided by the active cases.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Casey, Council? Casey, I saw a news report yesterday talking about the plasma treatment, which we've talked about and had available here really since May. And they were, because the president's been talking about it some, acting like this was a brand new thing. I mean, were we on the front edge of that?
I think that convalescent plasma is certainly something that is used for many different treatments and therapies. I think that it's one that is kind of a long-standing treatment. Dr. Sauer certainly may have more input here. I think that one of the things that we're seeing now is that we really need research. And so as time moves on, there will be more clinical trials just like this one that we're part of. And so there will be more clinical trials done on therapies just like convalescent plasma and this monoclonal spike protein that we're part of. And then there will be randomized control with placebo trials done so that we know for sure that these therapies and treatments are beneficial to patients. And so I think that as time goes on, that will be really beneficial to our country and our communities.
So if I added anything to that, here's kind of what I would say. After watching this for a long period of time, there's a bit of a battle going on between the academics in this and the people that would be with boots on the ground that are seeing these patients every day. And the academics have a hard time accepting treatment unless it has gone stringently through A, B, C, D, and E. And they'll have a tendency to, I'm not going to say do this to it, put their fingers on their nose, but they'll push back on it pretty hard until they have some definitive evidence that gives them the ability to say that. And I think that's kind of what's happened with this plasma deal right now is, we've seen a lot of success with it here from what I've heard so far. But it's technically anecdotal and it's not defined by science. And that's where all of this is coming in. And so I think that's where it's kind of interesting. I will agree with you, Mayor, to see the push. Actually, I felt like I've been reading the past couple of days is pushback against plasma, that it's unknown. And I don't think that's really fair. And I think that's the academic part getting out in the middle of it.
Okay. Well, thank you for that insight. It was not going to surprise me that our medical team, as well as our public health department, were on the front edge of something. I just wanted to call it out and
Either.
pat y'all on the back. Okay, I'll go back to you then, Jared.
All right. We also have Director of Community Development, Jason Riddlesberger, to talk to us a little bit from the community development standpoint. Jason?
Thank you, sir. Hello, Mayor and Council. I'm glad to be here with you today. We wanted to just give you an update on the CDBG CARES, specifically about the emergency assistance for rental, mortgage, and utility bills. We wanted to let you know that we had originally $300,000 available funds, and we have to this point spent about $28,000, so that we have about $270,000 remaining. We had originally publicized this to the public July 2nd through the City Communications Department. We put out info cards at legal aid, the libraries, the water department, just to get this out to the public. Of that 28,000 that we've spent, there were 57 applications and 45 of those were approved. The main reasons for the rejection of the 12 that didn't make the list were that they were outside of the city limits or they had no documentation of COVID impact. So these are great funds. We've doubled up our efforts to publicize this out to the public through the communications department. They put this back out on the Facebook and also through the website. So we're hoping to get more applications for that. The small business relief part of this, we also had $272,000 available in funds there. That was open to the public August 4th, but we've had no applications to date for that. So we are looking at if we don't get many applications for that, we're looking at putting some of that back into our rental, mortgage, and utility emergency assistance so that we can continue to help people in that manner. Another area we had was our emergency shelter. We had $75,000 it's already been spent for our emergency shelter when we put a lot of the folks in the hotels. And then, of course, our public services, $350,000 was given to the GSRC, Catholic Charities, Martha's Home, and the Coming Home program. So those have been spent as well.
Jason, can we just talk a little bit about the funds that were spent on people that were put up in hotels?
Sure.
I think there was some misinformation on social media last week about that. Tell us again how much the city spent putting people in hotels during COVID.
That was our emergency shelter, specifically put $75,000 into that program so that we could get some of our, predominantly our homeless individuals that we were either in danger of contracting COVID or had already tested positive for COVID. And so we wanted to get them into the hotel so that they could be separated from other homeless individuals so that we could prevent a major epidemic running through the homeless community. So it was, go ahead.
I just had seen a post on social media that said we spent $1.35 million on hotel rooms, and I knew that was not true. So this is just a great opportunity to remind citizens that if you want data about the city, you can always email public communications at amarillo.gov with any question on any topic, and they'll get you the statistics or the data to answer the questions that you have. So if you read something and you think, can that be true? You can check it with that email address, public communications at amarillo.gov. So we as a city, through CDBG funding or were those rental assistance dollars, Jason, the $75,000 spent on hotels?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And then you may not know, but maybe Kevin knows what hotels, the name of the hotels that collected that.
I know that the two predominant ones that we used were the Amarillo Value Inn, the Oyo on I-40 East.
Okay.
That was the only two we used.
The only two, the Oyo and the Amarillo Value Inn?
Correct.
Okay, great, because the hotel listed in these postings was also wrong. So just want citizens to know the facts on that we spent $75,000 to those two hotels, Amarillo's Value Inn and the Oyo. Thank you. I appreciate that information, Jason.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor, just to expand upon that, the state of Texas last week activated a convalescence center for anybody who had COVID at a state level. This was primarily activated for citizens that had symptoms or had issues out in the region and may need a similar approach that we have taken with our homeless population and those in need here locally in our community. So that may have driven some of the confusion in that the state did let a contract with a local hotelier for that program, but that is not a program that is being administered or functioning through the city. It is being administered through the Department of State Health Services, primarily out of Austin. So that may have driven some confusion that people had about that particular program. Our approach has been to focus specifically on addressing challenges with our homeless population and those in need in our local community. And it's been through our community development department that they have utilized the 2 hotels that Jason mentioned. And through that process, contacted over a dozen hotels to inquire about their interest and availability and ability to support the program through the normal purchasing processes that we would have gone through. So all of these types of things are readily available information. We'd be happy to share with anybody who wants the facts related to how these programs have been administered. But there are other programs that the state is administering through the Texas Division of Emergency Management and the Department of State Health Services that are outside of the purview of the City of Amarillo's operations.
Kevin, can you expound on, do you know the name of that hotel that the Department of State Health Services contracted with?
I don't have it right off the top of my head. I know me and Casey Stoughton had talked about it. So Casey, if she's still on the line, she might could assist us with that information.
I don't believe that information was shared with us. We can certainly get that information. I think if we do have a patient who is in need of those services, then we can contact DSHS and they can, we can enroll them in those services.
The other part of that is that they were activating hotels in jurisdictions across the state of Texas. So there was a hotel in Amarillo, there was one in Lubbock, one in Wichita Falls, one in so forth and so on. So every major city across the state had one of these operations activated to provide these types of support mechanisms as they were needed. We had conversations with DSHS, and initially their indication was to us that they felt that this was, a beneficial opportunity for the region. They were not anticipating heavy usage of it. So they were only looking at a handful of rooms potentially being available in the initial wave. Now, if the need expanded and there was need for additional rooms, then they would have expanded that contract accordingly. But they were starting on a very small scale to support regional activities outside of the Amarillo area. And we're open to accepting people from the Amarillo area if our public health department saw the need and that type of assistance would have been beneficial.
Hey, thank you. I just wanted to push out as much information and facts as we could, in response to that social media posting in case citizens were looking for the facts, and give them a chance to ask more questions if they wanted to. Thank y'all. Jason, anything else, or?
No, ma'am.
Ms. Powell, did you have a question?
No, ma'am, I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Any other council members have a question for, are we supposed to call him Sergeant Riddlesberger? What are we supposed to call you now?
I like Jason.
Jason? Okay.
It's contextual in this case.
Yeah,
we call him Sergeant Riddlesberger, but he's acting in an interim capacity over at community development right now with cooperation from the police department. So I've been calling him Jason in his current role. It sounds odd. No.
Okay. Thank you. We want to respect your service, Sergeant Riddlesberger. So, but we'll call you whatever you want.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
The only other thing we have on this topic is Dr. Sauer and possibly Andrew to give us an update on CARES assistance funding and assistance funding associated with coronavirus. Dr. Sauer.
Okay, so on the public safety reimbursement program, there's not been anything submitted by any businesses this past week. So those numbers still remain the same. On the $10,000 grant applications for the CRF, this is where we stand at this point in time. There are 42 applications that were received as of yesterday, and 17 of those are good to fund. So we've had 17 of them that are good to fund for a total of $162,000. So if you do the simple math, that's 107. That would be potentially 170,000, but there are a couple of them that did not ask for the entire $10,000 grant. We have two more that are almost ready to fund, and that would be $20,000. We have 11 that we sent back and gave them some the staff gave them some guidance on bringing it back to the committee, and that's 97,500. There were 3 of them that were denied or referred to the public safety reimbursement, and then we have 9 new applications for $89,000 that have yet to be seen. So therefore there's been 393,500 that have been worth of funds that have been asked for. 25,000 have been denied to this point. And so there's a total potential giving out of $368,500. So the good thing about that is if anybody is out there listening with business, if you've got under 50 employees, you're pretty square with the city, your business is in the city limits, and you have lost revenue because of COVID, there's still $181,000 that's left available to be applied for. And so I would highly suggest that you go ahead and do that. This is an easy way to just have at least a little bit of an infusion of cash that's actually coming from the CARES funding that is available. So the committee again will meet again on Friday. Look at the 11 if they have brought their package back to the committee, and plus we've got 9 new applications. So far it's been pretty successful. I would really like to see all of that money be sent out to businesses here in town that are in need, though. So that's, unless there's more that Andrew can add to that, that's all that I have.
No, sir, I think you covered it.
Eddie, thank you very much. We do certainly hope that, and that's one of the things that I want citizens to understand. The CARES Act gave a large sum of federal dollars to Austin. So Amarillo was entitled to $11 million, and they gave it to Austin, and now Austin has imposed some restrictions on how we can spend that money and how we can collect it. And what are we at roughly, Kevin? We've spent about $3 million of our CARES Act funding. Is that a good estimate?
It's kind of hard to say because of the various grants, but out of that 11 million that you're referencing, only 2.2 has been given to the city directly. Now we've received other grants, the almost $1 million in CDBG funds. Casey's Group's received almost $1 million between 2 grants for response activities and planning activities. So when you couple those together, we really are right around the $4 million mark total. Okay. That the city has been eligible for. And over time, if we spend beyond that, we potentially will be eligible for up to 11 million from the state. But it requires the expenditures to be within the categories that the state has authorized.
And so initially, as we were receiving that information, I know I had some conversations about could we go back to the governor and ask them to expand the types of categories that we could use, because otherwise our money is just sitting there. And, you know, some of the categories that I had talked about were infrastructure projects that I thought would stimulate economic activity that would help our small businesses, our retailers, our hoteliers, our restaurant owners, help them have a restart to our economy. And so there was something on social media about that last week, and somebody was trying to create a dialogue about how we were trying to spend COVID funds, instead of spending them on sick people or taking care of COVID needs, we were trying to spend them on the Civic Center. And I just want to give the context around that information. And the context is we have these funds designated for Amarillo, millions of dollars. We've covered every COVID expense. We've covered every COVID need. And those millions of dollars are still sitting there. And so what we were trying to do was expand the definition of things that would be approved, and infrastructure projects that had an economic stimulus component to them could help our local businesses respond and recover to COVID. So if you read that on social media and wanted more, and you happen to be watching this meeting, then you now have more information about that too. Anything else to add on that from the council? Questions or follow-up?
Yes, Mayor, following up on, that thought of just going back to the governor and having those conversations about how to help us recover from COVID. One of the things I'd like us to consider is going back to the governor and requesting an allowance for us to move on to phase 3. That would be a huge help for our local businesses if we are able to go back with the previous plan that was paused. When I look at our numbers compared to the rest of the state, our cases are not spiking. Our hospital is not maximum utilization. We are continuing to build more and more recoveries, individuals who are going to be carrying antibodies inside our own community. And we have been below the 500 active cases for quite a while. And we as a community managed, were we over 4,000, Casey, at one point? Was that the maximum, or was it the 3,000? My apologies. We were over 4,000 active cases at one time. And to be below 500 at this point, I think that our community is in a great position to be legitimately requesting the governor to allow us to move forward.
And by phase 3, Councilmember Hayes, do you mean restaurants going to like 75%? I mean, what do you mean when you use the phrase phase 3?
What the governor had outlined previously, and it was primarily capacity levels.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I need to visit with, maybe I just need to reach out to the governor's office and talk about, what their thought is on when that might happen, what criteria they're looking at. Are they considering splitting the geography of Texas based on statistics? Would they let the Panhandle or West Texas do something different than, say, the Metroplex area or more populous southern places in the state? So that's something for us to consider and talk about.
Well, and whenever you talk about it that way, Mayor, he actually picked us out of the pile and said we couldn't go to phase 2 for that period of time. And that might be a way that you kind of remind them, you put us at phase, you wouldn't let us go to phase 2 because we were spiking. So I think it's a fair thing to ask. So do we know how often the governor revisits this emergency declaration?
Well, everything we've seen is we don't know. We don't have any statement or policy from the governor's office that says how often they're going to change it. He is under frequent guidance and counsel from DSHS, from other departments, and makes changes when appropriate. I think the spike in other parts has caused a significant slowdown and even a backup a little bit. But I think they're trying to hold anymore. And I think that that's borne out by most of the jurisdictions have their positivity rates going down. Still means they're still dealing with a lot of positives. But we don't have policy or statement from the governor's office as to how frequently they will change. And I think it's going to be based wholly upon the numbers that we're experiencing as a state, and not necessarily as individual jurisdictions.
I'd really like for us to get schools open and give us another 30 days or so to see what our numbers are doing before we officially ask him to let us think about shifting. I'm very hopeful that we're going to, I think citizens are wearing masks and students will do that. People will continue to get this virus. We've never from the get-go thought we could keep people from getting it. We just wanted we wanted our population to get it at a rate that was slow enough we could process them and they would get the best medical care we could offer. And so I think we've all been praying for our schools to open safely. And we're beginning to hear stories of, well, this classroom is down, or areas in the Panhandle where whole schools had to close again. And I'd like to get through that. And then I think you guys are making a great point. I think, Councilmember Hayes, it is good for us to be focused on when we would like to move to the next stage, especially if our numbers are staying level. Casey, do you have thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yes, I have two things. First, I do have the name of the hotel that you asked about earlier.
Do you, Casey, do you think is it a violation for us to share that publicly? Because another way of giving that, if what the social media post said is that it went to the hotel that my family owns. And so I just want to be able to say that's not true. My family's hotel didn't receive any of the city dollars or the state dollars for any of these programs. We've not received any of that payment. So can you just confirm that the hotel is not the one owned by my family?
It is not. It's a national chain. It is not one that's is owned.
Yeah, so that's fine. And I don't know if DSHS has the confidentiality agreement with that hotel or not. I just wanted to get out that post on social media was not true.
And I can confirm with DSHS. It is a national chain. I can confirm with DSHS about the specifics, and then certainly get back to you all. With regard to the conversation that's occurring now, I think the most important thing, whether we're talking about the actual occupancy numbers, would be the need to stay 6 feet apart. And one of the things that we see, especially when you are taking your masks down, is that it's a ripe time for exposure. And so if you've got to be able to maintain that social distance, and you've got to be able to keep people apart. And so I think that is the very most important thing to remember when you're talking about occupancy numbers or levels of capacity or whatever you're looking at. You've still got to be able to maintain at least that 6 foot of distance. And so I would just encourage us to remember those pieces of the guidance.
And Mayor, I would just follow up with that absolutely the health is a huge, and the transmission of this virus is a huge part of all those decisions. And it is one layer, and this is a multi-dimensional issue that we're facing as a community. And so it's also that reminder of the financial impact that we have in our community, the mental impact that we have. And I'm not sure exactly the day count, but what are we roughly? We're about 180 days into our 15 days to slow the spread. So it's at some point. And so, personally, another 30 days sounds like a long time to me. And I do hear what you're saying, and it does allow, I think we need to at least begin this conversation. I don't want to go over 200 days. That the impact has been successful. The things that we've implemented, again, we're not spiking our hospitalization which was one of the major issues at the start of the virus, to be sure that we were able to provide every person who contracted the virus with medical assistance, and we are meeting that need and that service. And with the school openings, absolutely anticipate that the number of cases are going to go up. That's just the reality. But it is going to be among the least at risk, the least vulnerable individuals in our population, that the statistics of how that group under age 15 is impacted by this virus is minimal. It is incredibly low. What the last statistics, that the median age of deaths was 76. That was the median. So it's much higher than that. That lower than 15 is a very low impact. And I don't want to see the rest of the city waiting beyond a necessary time period for a low risk part of our population.
Any other council members have thoughts to add to that?
Mayor, the only thing that I would like to add is before you have a conversation with Governor Abbott, I would like for you to have a conversation with Casey and our other local medical professionals to get their input and what they're thinking.
Okay. And I think certainly agree with what you're saying, Elaine. Every business that's held back from being fully open or doing their full offering of services is feeling the impact of it. And I think we're also mindful of all the teachers that are going back to school too. So certainly good data showing that our kids are not as affected by it. But we're also mindful of all the teachers that are in all different age ranges that are now more likely to be exposed to it in the school settings too. So that's another component just to keep in mind. Anybody else?
Let me ask a question. Of the 11 million that's been designated to help the city of Amarillo, I understand we're at 4 million. If we don't use all that, where does that go? Back to the federal government, the state, or what?
Kevin.
Jared, you want to try and answer?
Kevin.
Councilmember Smith, to answer that question, only that funding is only available upon expenditure of those dollars as a reimbursement. So while the state gave us an initial allocation of $2.2 million up front from that $11 million allocation, only if we don't spend that $2.2 million, that would have to go back to the state, and then the state would either use it or return it to the federal government. And then the $11 million, the larger amount that we would be eligible for, is only based on reimbursement upon actual expenditures related to that. Keeping in mind that we have over $3 million of expenses related to response activities that we have documented under the FEMA program. My guess, and we don't have this in fact yet, but my guess is that will be where we burn through a majority of our funding that we currently have, plus beyond that we could then request reimbursement from the state. It's hard to imagine how FEMA will come back and do reimbursement on those types of programs under the Disaster Act programs, but we remain in a position of documenting every expense related to the response to COVID.
The other part of that is some of the reasons why we haven't been able to access some of those funds that have been authorized is that they do have pretty specific guidelines for what an eligible expense is and what an eligible expense is not. The coronavirus has had significant impact on our ability to do a lot of capital projects and other things that were affected by significantly declined revenue or significantly lower revenue during a certain period of time. So it is our expectation that future allocations for CARES or other type of aid funding is going to have broader use where we can do more good for the community. But at this time, it's very specific on what those funds can be used for, what those funds will be reimbursed for.
Thank you.
So I think, Howard, the answer is I think Austin will keep them if we don't spend them. But I think we don't know that for sure yet, but that's what I would predict.
Okay.
So that's why I was trying to figure out how to get them to Amarillo. Okay.
Mayor, I did have one other question for Casey on, I had read an article that the CDC had changed their testing protocol, that now before, like if you tested positive, then before you were released and cleared, you took another positive test. But now, is it correct that after just the 10 days and no fever, that a second test is not required?
Right. So all along we've had the test-based strategy or the non-test-based strategy. And for the most part, we have used the non-test-based strategy to release people back to work. Just last week, the CDC came out with new guidance that indicated to us that they no longer recommend the test-based strategy for release to work. And so we are continuing to use the non-test-based strategy like we have used in most cases.
And so is our local strategy that 10-day after you tested positive and is the 10-day, does that start the count when you first had symptoms?
So the 10 days starts on the date of the test collected, because that's a very definite date. Sometimes the date of symptom onset can be very subjective. And so we do start the 10-day count from the date that the test was collected. And then you have to be 24 hours fever-free, and then a resolution of symptoms at the end of that 10 days. And then we will, our patient monitoring team will release that patient back to work or school. And that is for someone who's positive. For someone who is a contact, then it's still a 14-day quarantine from their break in contact with the person who's positive.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else then? Jared, anything else?
No, ma'am, not on coronavirus.
Council, are we done with questions? That's very good dialogue today. Okay, let's move on then to item 1C, an update on transit multimodal facility.
All right, Mayor, we've been working on a multimodal transit facility for a number of years now. We've worked with the Federal Transit Administration to they funded a grant to be able to do a study on where a multimodal transit facility would need to be located to best serve our community, to best serve our updated route structure. We've been working on property acquisition and a number of other steps to move in that way along with grants. We weren't successful in those grant applications, and we made those applications over the course of a number of years. That said, we're still moving forward with the project, and to give us an update on that transit multimodal facility, we've got our Director of Transit, Marita Welledge-Riley. Marita?
Good afternoon. I want to share my screen with you. Can everyone see that?
No, I don't see it.
Okay.
But we can wait. We love this, watching people acquire new skills, because we like learning, Marita, and we value people struggling to figure out new skills. And Zoom calls are a new skill that we've all had to struggle. Hey,
there we go.
I see it. Good job.
Okay. That is a rendering of the concept of our multimodal terminal. And we have completed the phase one, which is the slide here. There we go. The feasibility study, that was completed in 2019, and we determined what the space requirements were for a joint operation that would include Amarillo City Transit, Greyhound, or any other service providers in the area that would need a terminal to operate and transfer passengers from. And that would include Panhandle Community Transit Service too, and Cord Care, and any other providers that would want to join us. So we did the site selection, and we reviewed up to 10 different sites to come to the one that was selected. And then the preliminary environmental was done, and we submitted that to the Federal Transit Administration. As far as our funding availability, we were very fortunate to receive $9.8 million in CARE Act funds. And those funds will cover Amarillo City Transit operations from February of 2020 through the end of fiscal year 21, which would be October 1st. And we may, depending on how well we can stretch those funds, they may even go into our fiscal year 22. Because we have those CARE funds, we have funding that was our 5307 capital and operating grant for fiscal year 1920, and we have funds that have been allocated to us for our fiscal year 2021. And those funds equal $6.6 million. And so we are recommending that we use those funds for construction of the terminal. And we would, the federal share of that 6.6 is $5.2 million. Now the local share would be $1.32 million. And already have a commitment from AEDC to fund $1.2 million, which would leave approximately $120,000 remaining in local share monies to be able to accomplish the project. Here is a kind of a phase approach to the completion of the project. We've already finished phase one, which was a preliminary design and feasibility study, which was funded 100% by TxDOT. We are currently in phase two. We're working on the request for proposal, or request for qualifications, excuse me, for the architectural and engineering part of the project. We hope to have the RFQ completed. One of the reasons it takes so long is that we have to include and be aware of all the different federal requirements that we have to meet in order to be able to do this. Then we would go through the selection process once we have and determine which firms were qualified for the architectural and engineering portion of the project. And we come to council for approval. Then we move into phase three once awarded the design and engineering contract. And we would move into a phase where we would begin design up to 20 to 25% of the project. And at the same time, we would be working on a request for proposal for a construction contract. Then we would propose to move into phase four with the selection of a construction manager and seek council approval, complete the design. That would be going on while and working with the construction manager. And at the same time, we'd start redesigning some of our routes and working with the public to get public input on that. Because when we move from downtown, we would need to, or shift west in downtown, that we would be able to have our network together and everybody know where we're going once the construction phase is done. Now, the construction phase is estimated to take 8 to 9 months, from March 2021 to October 2021, and hopefully the project will be complete at the end of October of 2021. So do you have any questions?
All of those dates could push and pull just a little bit, but that's the estimated timeline as we currently stand.
We have worked with Jerry on kind of coming to that estimated timeline. Of course, the federal procurement process can take a long time.
Council, questions, comments?
Can't wait for this project to start.
Me either.
I think it'll be, it would be really great for the city and for everything, transportation in town. I'm very hopeful that we can push this one across the line.
So Marita, can you clarify back on that? Go back to slide 2 on the funding.
Yes.
And so is all of this still pending? This is the, can you just walk us through what's been secured and what is still on hold? We have the 1.2 commitment from EDC, but where are we on the other funding?
Well, you have already approved our 1920, and you've accepted that. And in fact, you've met that with approximately $2.1 million in local funds. And that because that was to fund our operating. The capital, part of the capital in that grant was for the design of this facility. And so the capital is for the design is already approved in that grant. Now we would have to go and we'd have to revise our grant application with the federal government, but those funds are already allocated to us, and you've already allocated a match to the tune of $2.1 million. So when we look at this, the federal share of 80% is $5.28 million. And I will remind you, when we go through the operating grant, capital is funded at 80-20, operations are funded at 50-50. So if we use the grant to do capital, there's less of the city's funds that are required to match those funds. So right now we have our match to do the project would be $1.32 million. And we have the commitment from AEDC for 1.2. And technically that $120,000 remaining city match has already been set aside or allocated to Amarillo City Transit for that 1920 grant. Now, the $3.8 million that's coming from our fiscal year 2021 has been, it's a formula grant, so it comes to us. We haven't applied for it yet because we have the CARES Act funds, but we can apply for that and then use that for the project.
Councilman Hayes, to expand upon that, I think where you were maybe leaning towards is that the city has pursued two different grant options to provide capital funds to construct this facility. A build grant that we were denied last year, and then an FTA facilities grant that we learned that we were denied earlier this year. So the next granting opportunity would be next year if we were to pursue a facilities grant or a build grant to try to get additional capital dollars to do that. Marita, though, has worked through evaluating the different funding sources that we currently have available, and we are in some ways reaping the benefit of FTA covering the expenditures of transit operations with CARES Act dollars that has opened up the door to where we could potentially use some of our existing funding from our annual allocation towards this project to cover the expense of constructing this project and moving forward in lieu of pursuing additional grants for a capital facilities campaign.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you walking back through that.
Marita, I'm impressed with the way you're thinking forward and outside of your normal operating budget, just to think about how we can, nobody's chosen to do the COVID situation. And I think we would in a heartbeat choose for it to go away. But in the midst of adversity, there's always opportunity. And I think you're using this adversity to examine where you are and the goals of your department to better serve citizens. And so I would commend you on that. And I would say, as you continue looking for grants that you can apply for, if more of these dollars came available, I continue to hear citizens be concerned about the lack of benches and covered bus stops for citizens that use the buses. And so I think as a council, we all feel a pull toward, and it's always been tied to funding. It's not that we haven't wanted that for our city, but I know that that's a priority for you as the department head as well. So but I would just throw out, number one, thank you for working on this, for having a broader vision. And number two, just keeping in mind a covered bus stops or something else that we're longing to have funding for in the city. And so if you were to get capital grants that you could put toward the cost of the bus station, perhaps we could look for a way to use some of the dollars that would then be available toward covered bus stops.
Well, you will have next council meeting, I believe you will have from us the contract, proposed award for a contract for our benches and shelter project. So
wonderful.
I will seek funds for benches and shelters.
Okay, wonderful. I can't wait to hear that. Thank you for that. And thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Anything else, Council, for Marita? Okay. Jared, thank you on that. Is that everything then on item 1C, Jared?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Item 1B is request future agenda items and reports from the city manager. Whoops.
I'd like to make a request.
Hey, Howard, just a second. I think I'm freezing up. I can't see you guys. Let me get it back set right, and we can talk about it.
We can see you.
You can see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, now I'm back. Thanks for letting me pause. Makes me nervous when I can't see you guys. Okay, Howard.
It's come to my attention from a citizen in the community that would like to address the city council. It's about civic center plans and related real estate. And so I'd like to ask that we arrange for an executive session for the whole council and Alex Fairley to come and make a presentation to us.
You know, executive session, the Open Meetings Act only allows us to do that if it relates to real estate purchase or to a contract negotiation. I think this needs to run through the legal department to find out whether or not what you're proposing. So I think you're going to have to give Brian and Jared some specific information about what would be discussed in that session. Otherwise, the Open Meetings Act is not going to allow that.
They are welcome to ask Alex Fairley about that.
Okay. So, Jared, do you mind just following up to see if that's something that could be arranged? Obviously, only if it fits within the legalities of doing a proper executive session. And
yes, ma'am. I will chase down all the appropriate information and work with the city attorney to evaluate the appropriateness, meet with you and discuss placement on agendas in accordance with our ordinances.
Okay, great. Anybody else have something?
Is it too early to ask for maybe an update on how things are going with Parks and Rec? The master plan and that?
It's not too early.
Kevin, can you give us an update on how far and if we're at a point where we can do an update? And we can always do an update. I just don't know if work has been done at this point.
Yes, Councilmember Sauer, I have visited with Michael Kashuba. He can provide you an initial kind of the needs assessment portion of the Parks Master Plan, what they've learned through some of their initial community engagement. So we can schedule that at one of our upcoming meetings to provide you a summary of that information on specific to the Parks Master Plan and what the consultant has completed up to this point.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. I think that moves us then next to the consent agenda. Anything on the consent agenda that needs to come off for further questions or discussion, Council? Okay, hearing nothing. Do we have a motion on the consent items?
Yes, Mayor, we do. I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Powell and seconded by Councilmember Sauer to approve the items on the consent agenda. All of those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, that passes with the 5-0 vote. Item 3A is to discuss and consider a proposed tax rate. Mr. City Manager.
Hi, Mayor. We have Assistant City Manager Laura Storrs, our Chief Financial Officer, here to present to make the presentation and then to answer questions the council might have on the proposed tax rate. Laura.
All right, good afternoon. I have a presentation that I am going to share my screen real quick to help walk us through. Okay, first off, I'd like to start with, we presented a proposed budget. First of all, we filed it with our city secretary on August 4th, and we presented a proposed budget along with a 2020 proposed property tax rate on August 4th and August 5th to council. And so the item today is the first action that council will need to take related to the property tax rate. And so we're going to go through a presentation for some information about the 2020 proposed property tax rate. And then we will be looking for council to take a vote on the proposed rate. So we'll start here with the first slide. There's been a lot of changes that have taken place in this current year. And so in the midst of COVID-19 and everything going on with the pandemic, we also have brand new tax laws that are in effect. And that is related to the recent legislative session, and it is Senate Bill 2. And it's made several changes to the property tax rate and the truth in taxation laws. And the intention behind it was to make everything as clear and transparent as possible for our ratepayers. And so we're going to start here and talk about some of the changes that this new tax law has put into effect. And these changes went into effect for the current budget year that we are proposing and this proposed tax rate. So the first thing that we need to talk about is in this first blue box here. Previously, we have always talked about an effective tax rate. And so what an effective tax rate is that's essentially allowing a city to receive the same amount of property tax revenue for operations and maintenance in an upcoming year as they did in the prior year. Senate Bill 2 has changed that wording. The effective tax rate is now called the no new revenue tax rate. And again, as I mentioned, that is a rate that is calculated to give us a taxing entity the same amount of operating and maintenance revenue in the next year as they had in the previous year, but it does allow for the debt service side of the rate to fluctuate based on the debt service requirements. The next change in some of the wording related to Senate Bill 2 is the rollback rate. So in prior years, we had always referred to a rollback rate, and that was basically a rate that triggered the ability for taxpayers to petition for an election to possibly ask or vote a lower property tax rate in than what was approved by council. And again, that allowed a voter to petition. Now, what Senate Bill 2 has changed is that rollback rate is now referred to as a voter approval tax rate. And there's a few differences here. The rollback rate essentially allowed 8% more in operating and maintenance dollars than what had been received the prior year, where now this voter approval tax rate only allows for 3.5% above the prior year's maintenance and operating collections. And the other difference is, if you will go down to the next box here, Senate Bill 2 now requires a mandatory election if a tax rate is adopted that exceeds that voter approval tax rate. So before, again, the rollback rate allowed a citizen to petition for an election, where now Senate Bill 2 with the voter approval tax rate, if the council were to approve a rate that exceeded the voter approval tax rate, it would automatically trigger a mandatory election, which would occur in November. The next change related to Senate Bill 2 is, in prior years, there were always 2 public hearings that were required related to property taxes. Now, Senate Bill 2 only requires 1 public hearing. So that was another change that went into effect and will go into effect this year. The last major change that I wanted to outline in this presentation is we have several new public notices. We actually have one posted out on the city's website at this point in time, but later this week, we will be publishing public notices in the newspaper and also on the city's website to advertise for the public hearings that will be coming up related to property tax and also to adopting the budget. And we're going to go in a little bit more detail in a minute, but I just wanted council to be aware that a lot of the public notices have changed related to Senate Bill 2. I'll go on to the next slide, and I want to also state, if there's a question from council as I'm going through this, please stop me and we can talk about it as we go, or we can cover it at the end. So this next slide here is just kind of outlining what we talked about and some of the changes related to Senate Bill 2. So we've got a comparison of the 2019 rates versus the 2020 rates. And again, the wording has changed. So let's kind of look at these in comparison. Last year for 2019, the effective tax rate was 0.36198. For 2020, that same rate is now called the no new revenue tax rate, and the calculated rate is 0.38070. And again, for this 2020 number, this would allow the city to receive approximately the same amount of operating and maintenance dollars as they did in the prior year, and allow that debt service rate to increase or decrease as needed based on debt service requirements. This next line here, again, we talked about how the rollback tax rate is now called the voter approval tax rate. So this last year for 2019, again, it allowed for an up to 8% increase, and that rollback tax rate was 0.41021. For 2020, the voter approval tax rate that's been calculated, and it's based on only a 3.5% increase. So this is the upper limit before a mandatory election is required. That rate is 0.41586. So you can see the difference, the no new revenue rate versus the voter approval rate. They're right there. So then let's look at what the approved rate for 2019 was and the 2020 proposed rate. So currently the rate that's in effect now that was approved for 2019 is 0.38851. And you'll see that falls in between the effective tax rate and the rollback tax rate for 2019. So last year, it just had to be voted on by council. It did not exceed this rollback tax rate, so it did not trigger any ability for a citizen to petition for an election. Over here on the 2020 year, we have a proposed tax rate that the proposed budget is built around of 0.39681. And you'll see once again, that rate falls in between the no new revenue tax rate and the voter approval tax rate. So it does not meet or exceed this voter approval tax rate. So at this point, if council proceeds with this proposed tax rate, it would not require a mandatory election to occur in November. Let's talk now about, on this next slide, we wanted to talk through why our budget is built with the proposed tax rate that it is versus using that no new revenue tax rate. And the difference between those two rates is about $1.8 million. And the difference on those is the proposed tax rate. We've left the operating and maintenance rate flat with what the 2019 rate is. And we'll go over that on the next slide. But the reason that it does produce more revenue is because appraised values did increase over the 2019 appraised values, and there are new properties that have rolled on with the appraised values. So this 1.8 million is would allow the city to capture that growth in appraised values and those new properties coming on. Over here, I know 1.8 million is a lot of dollars, and kind of want to talk through what that could translate to. This 1.8 million, if we were to go with that no new revenue tax rate, we would have to cut $1.8 million out of the proposed budget that has been filed. And what that could translate to, and again, what we were trying to do with the proposed budget, and we'll be having more presentations on that in coming weeks, but we were attempting to keep all of our rate increases as low as possible, keep the tax rate as low as possible, but still maintain the same service levels that were built into the budget that we're operating under right now. And we had to take that into account in light of the fact that COVID-19 has had impact on several other revenue sources. One, for instance, is our sales tax. We have been very fortunate, and sales tax has been coming in strong. But in our proposed budget for this upcoming year, it is still slightly lower than what's in the current approved budget. And the reason for that is we're still seeing some uncertain trends related to COVID-19 impacts. We're also seeing some reduction in our franchise fees and our fines and forfeitures. And as mentioned, we'll be going over that more in a couple of weeks during our proposed budget presentation. But I wanted to make sure council understood why we built a budget, and it would have been very challenging for us to cut out 1.8 million. To keep those service levels at the same amount as the current year, we'd have to look at finding another 1.8 million. And again, these are just a couple of examples of what 1.8 million translates to. One thing, for instance, is 24 police officer positions could equal 1.8 million. Or we could buy approximately 2 fire trucks with 1.8 million, just to kind of give everyone a frame of reference here. Or we could potentially resurface about 25 lane miles with 1.8 million. And another example, and again, these are all ors. We couldn't do all of this with 1.8 million. We could do each one of these different things with 1.8. The other example here is pothole repairs. 1.8 million translates to about 29,500 pothole repairs. So these are significant dollars that we would very much be challenged with trying to maintain current service levels, but cut back that 1.8 million to equal that no new revenue tax rate. On this next slide here, we want to talk again, and I've talked a little bit about this in the previous slides. There's various elements that make up the property tax rate. There's 2 pieces. The first one is the operations and maintenance piece. And we have a comparison here from the 2019 rate to the 2020 rate. And you will see we're proposing to keep that operation and maintenance piece of the rate flat. So it's currently at 0.34448. And for 2020, we're proposing to keep it flat at 0.34448. And as you can see, that would be no change. Then the other piece of the rate is the interest and sinking portion of the rate. What that does, it pays for debt service for those property tax debt issuances. So for 2019, our interest and sinking portion of the rate is 0.04403. We are proposing for it to increase up to 0.05233. So there is an increase there, and here's outlines of why that portion of the rate would be increasing. We issued a small amount of additional debt associated with the 2016 voter approved bonds, and it was related to Proposition 2, which was for public safety. We did that earlier this year, and you can see the impact on this interest and sinking rate is 0.0005. So just a very small fraction of a penny. The other issuance that affects this interest and sinking rate is the Thompson Pool debt issuance from earlier this summer. The portion of the tax rate associated with that debt issuance is 0.0030. So again, just 0.3 of a penny to pay for the debt service associated with that Thompson Pool debt issuance from earlier this year. And then finally, we also issued some tax notes associated with reimbursing the city for the purchase of some property over on South Johnson Street. And the rate will go up by 0.0048 to support that debt service issuance. So those three things were the reason that this interest and sinking rate is needing to go up from the 2019 rate to the 2020 rate. And down here at the bottom, you'll see the totals. So the current 2019 rate is 0.38851. And the 2020 rate, we are proposing to go up to 0.39681. That is a difference of 0.00830. And again, I know I'm talking about a lot of decimal places, so let's break this down where it may make a little bit more sense. What that translates to $100,000 value of a home in Amarillo is $8.30 per year. On this next slide, we every year we try to take a comparison of the city's proposed property tax rate and compare it with somewhat similar sized cities across the state of Texas. So what we have done is we have pulled the 10 larger cities than Amarillo based on population, and then the 10 smaller cities than Amarillo also based on population. And what we're going to look at in the next two charts is we're going to compare the proposed 2020 tax rate for the city of Amarillo compared to the approved 2019 property tax rates for those 20 cities. And you'll see right here, I'm kind of giving away what we're going to show, but all of the city's rate is lower than all but one of those comparable cities' tax rates. So on the next chart here, this graph, and I apologize, I know this is a little bit busy here, but squeezing that much information onto one graph, it kind of makes it a little bit smaller. You'll see Amarillo's right here in the middle. It's the green bar right in the middle. So to the left are the 10 cities that are larger than Amarillo, and to the right are the 10 cities that are smaller than Amarillo, all based on population. So what this graph shows, these bars, these blue bars, and then the green bar for the city of Amarillo are the tax rates for each of these cities. So the blue bars represent the 2019 approved tax rates for each of the corresponding cities. And then the green bar here represents the city of Amarillo's proposed 2020 rate of 0.39681. Then there's this orange line that kind of trails down. That is the population. So you'll see what's a little challenging is to go 10 cities larger. We pick up cities like Austin, Fort Worth, El Paso, Arlington, and you can see their populations are a lot larger than Amarillo. So that's why you see this large uptick in this orange line. You can also see each of their rates here on these gray boxes that are on each of the blue bars. Then as you come down, here's Amarillo's population, which is a little over 200,000, all the way down to Waco. And wanted to point out here that the lower tax rate than the city of Amarillo is right here in Midland. And you can see that their 2019 tax rate is 0.3922 versus the city's proposed tax rate for 2020 of 0.39681. The average of these 21 cities, including the city of Amarillo, is 0.604842. So about 60 and a half cents. And we are at just under 40 cents for this next year. If there's not questions about this chart, I'm going to go to this next one. And first of all, these are the exact same 21 cities that were on the last chart. We just sorted them from highest to lowest. So what we're showing on this chart is we took the taxable values for each of these communities divided by their population, divided by 100 times their tax rate. So it would have been the 2019 tax rate for all the blue bars and then the 2020 tax rate for Amarillo. So what this is giving us in essence is this is the tax revenue per capita. And you can see that Amarillo is over here on the far right at the lowest amount of $221. And what this is outlining is that the city of Amarillo, we do have a low tax rate. We also have lower appraised values in comparison with a lot of the other similar sized cities in the state of Texas. And so those two components put together put us way over here on the right, which is the lowest amount. You can see the average of these cities is about $453 per capita, where the city is at less than half of that at $221 per capita. If there's not any questions on this, or if we need to come back to it, we can. I'm going to go to this next slide here and want to show, each year we try to show where the city of Amarillo rate falls in proportion with the total tax bills that our citizens are seeing. Now, again, you are all aware we have two counties. We have the city of Amarillo, and then we have several school districts that are inside the city limits. So we just picked one of the more common examples to show here, but please know that this does not vary more than a percentage point or two between all the various combinations of these tax bills. So on this chart, it shows the Amarillo Independent School District with a citizen being in Potter County, and it shows the 2019 rates for each of the taxing entities on this bill, except for the city of Amarillo. We did go ahead and include our 2020 proposed rate. Now, these other entities could have changes to their tax rates. We aren't sure on those quite yet. It's a little early to know. And so we will update these once we have them. But these are their 2019 rates. And you can see that even with the city's 2020 rate, which is a slight increase from the 2019 rate, the city of Amarillo makes up about 16% of the total tax bill. And this doesn't vary a whole lot from one year to the next. It usually stays right around 15-16% of the property tax bill. And again, I know this is Amarillo Independent School District in Potter County, but it's very similar with Canyon Independent School District in Randall County, and then all the other various versions of property tax bills based on the location of where a citizen lives. This next and final slide is to give a timeline associated with property tax and what council's going to be seeing over the next few weeks. And as I talk through this, I'm going to have Brian McWilliams, our city attorney, jump in here in just a second and talk through a little bit of this, because this is something different than what we've been doing over the past several weeks. So we want to make sure council has an understanding of why we are doing this and kind of explain to our citizens why we're doing this. We have two more action items related to property tax after today's vote on the proposed rate. The first item that's going to take place will be on September 8th. On September 8th, we are going to do the one and only public hearing on the tax rate. And we're going to do the first reading on that tax rate and have council take a vote on it. Now, here's where the difference shows up. We have been doing all of our council meetings over Zoom because of COVID-19. And there have been some challenges as we've been looking at the property tax laws. Some of the governor's orders we have determined do not possibly cover into this property tax portion of the law. And so we are needing to do in-person meetings for these two items. What we're looking at doing, we've already got a scheduled Zoom meeting for September 8th for the regular council meeting. So what we will do is we will have an in-person meeting at 4 p.m. at the Amarillo Civic Center complex in the Grand Plaza room on September 8th. So we'll have the normal Zoom meeting at 1 p.m. followed by an in-person meeting to conduct the required steps associated with the property tax changes, and also with proposed budget. And those will be done in person on September 8th and on the 15th. On the 15th, that is normally a work session day for our council, but we need to have the property tax rate approved within 7 days of the initial reading of the property tax rate. And that is a change from Senate Bill 2. So we are not allowed to wait 2 weeks in between. So we have to do them back-to-back weeks. So on the 8th, we will do the public hearing and the first reading and vote. And on September 15th, we will do the second and final reading and have council take a vote. Council will also need to ratify the tax rate on that date. This meeting will also need to be done in person, and we have it scheduled for 12 p.m. at the Amarillo Civic Center complex, again in the Grand Plaza room. And we will be putting out press releases associated with this. We are also publishing notices in the city's, in the Globe News, and also on the city's website. And Brian, if you're available, can you maybe give council just a little bit more legal information on why we are needing to do these meetings in person since we've been doing Zoom since then? Thank you, Brian.
Be glad to. Yeah, I'm sorry about that, Laura. Just very briefly, with the hearing on tax rates and budgets, those are special rules that we see once a year. And in this particular case, during the pandemic, as you all know, the governor suspended multiple rules in various codes to allow for social distancing and for governments to continue governmental business using video conferencing. However, these two particular rules are very specific in nature, and they certainly contemplate a live presentation, if you will. And so my recommendation is to go ahead and have these hearings in person. You can still certainly carry them over Zoom, but this will allow complete, plain, compliance with the statute, in my opinion. So that's the short of it.
So we're going to, go ahead, Mayor.
No, it's okay. You go, Jared.
Well, I was just going to say that the reason we're only hitting the things that we're required or could be argued that are required per state statute to be done in person, we're still trying to balance that with the need to provide the best safeguards we can for our citizens, our staff, and our council in accordance with the governor's executive orders for coronavirus and remote meetings, et cetera. So we're just doing the things that we have to do in person. Everything else is being handled through our meeting format that's authorized through the governor.
So, Brian, you're saying that the governor's orders that change the Open Meetings Act that allows digital meetings did not include these two provisions with regard to passing the budget and setting the tax rate.
You are absolutely correct, Mayor.
Okay. So that's confusing, but we want to be absolutely in compliance. So.
And Mayor, if I may add, I think, again, as I kind of started at the beginning of the presentation, this has been a challenging year because we do have brand new tax laws from Senate Bill 2, along with COVID-19, and trying to balance to ensure we're complying with all of the new laws, along with, as Jared mentioned, the safety and health of our citizens, our employees, our council. It's been challenging. And again, we have not taken any of this lightly and have worked to find the best solution. And this is the recommendation from our legal advisors to move forward with these 2 meetings to be in person. Everything else will continue to be conducted at this point in time over Zoom meetings.
Jared, could we just add maybe a report next week on your thoughts on in-person meetings versus Zoom and why we're still at Zoom? And so since it's work session next week, could we add that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. Pardon my interruption, Laura.
Oh, you are just fine. That was my final slide. So I know I covered a lot of information. And so I wanted to open it up to council now. If you had any questions on any of these slides or anything related to property tax, I would be more than happy to answer those questions for you.
Yes, Laura, would you restate the effective tax rate for 2019?
Yes, I sure will. The effective tax rate, and I believe I emailed out a version of this earlier internally here that may have had a bad rate on it. The effective tax rate for 2019 is 0.36198. And it's on the slide that's on the screen now.
Okay, thank you, because I had a different rate.
Yes,
I appreciate that.
You bet. I apologize. I will send you a copy of this later so you have the final rate on it.
Okay, I appreciate that very much, Laura. This makes a lot more sense to me now.
All right, great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Council, is a lot of information. I know Laura's worked hard to put that presentation together and her team.
Mayor, my only other question would be the in-person meeting on the 15th. You know, we're going to be scheduled for an in-person workshop later that day anyway, so that's very easy to accommodate. You know, I'd be interested in hearing the council's thoughts about on the 8th. Is there a benefit? Does the council prefer if we're going to have to all go downtown and meet there at 4 p.m.? You know, we may or may not be finished with our agenda at that time. It is a full work session. So just thoughts on pros and cons of just scheduling the entire meeting down there to begin with, as opposed to separating part on Zoom and then part in person just for the tax rate issue.
I think that would get to the philosophical conversation that the mayor wanted me to present. Why are we meeting in person? Why are we meeting together? Or why are we meeting in person versus why are we meeting on Zoom? With regard to why are we meeting on Zoom, you know, we're taking advantage of the safety opportunities and the safety allowances that the governor has given us. I know that we do have at-risk persons, both in our citizens that like to watch the meetings and view the meetings, but also on our council and in our staff. So that's why we've been taking advantage of taking advantage is the wrong word, utilizing the tools afforded us by the governor to be able to safely conduct meetings. Because of the conflict or lack of clarity in state statute with regard to adopting the tax rate and the governor's executive order regarding allowing council meetings to be conducted virtually, I made the decision to only have those things that we have a lack of clarity or conflict in person, because we don't want to approve a tax rate in a way that's not supported by the governor or by statute. We know that the statute says we need to do it in person. So that's why we're doing that thing in the council meetings and everything else that we do. We know are covered in the order of the governor. So that's why we're continuing to do those remotely, or continuing to utilize the safety protocols, the remote meetings that have been. So that is it in a nutshell. But I know that I'm probably going a little bit too far down that road for Brian's comfort. But we can get more into detail on that next week when we have the conversation that the mayor requested earlier about just remote versus in-person meetings, the plans, the philosophy, et cetera. But that's kind of where I've been so far. And why
I appreciate that response on the big picture, on the pros and cons, and balancing that as we go forward. And I'm just bringing up the issue about specifically September 8th.
Okay.
And if I may add one other thing to that conversation, we already have certain council items that have been advertised that need to take place on September 8th, and they've already been advertised that those will be conducted over Zoom. And so we, no matter what, have to do those items over a Zoom meeting. And then I think that's part of the difference as well, because on September 8th, we'll be bringing forward the first readings on the PID budgets, and those all have to be advertised through mailings, through the newspaper, those type things. And they were already sent out and shown that they were going to occur on September 8th at 1 p.m. over Zoom. And so we couldn't necessarily take the entire council meeting, even if we decided there was a safe way to do it, we couldn't shift all of it to an in-person meeting.
Okay, well, that makes sense. There's a reason and a purpose.
There is, yes.
Any other questions, council, about the tax rate presentation? I don't want to rush you. Okay. Laura, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Mayor.
Talk about item 3B, which is a public hearing and consideration of a resolution to submit a bus and bus facilities 533-9 program grant application for federal and state funding of Amarillo City Transit. Mr. City Manager.
Mayor, we need to take a vote on item.
Of course we do. We talked about it.
Yes, okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frida.
You're most welcome. And I'm ready to make that motion. Mayor, I move that the proposed tax rate for the maintenance and operation and debt service for the proposed 2020-2021 tax rate. Just a moment here. I got myself off track here. Let me start again. I move to propose tax rate of 0.39681 for maintenance and operation and debt service for the proposed 2020-2021 City of Amarillo fiscal budget year be approved.
Second.
That was a lot.
It was a lot, but I'm so glad you're bringing us back around to it. It's been moved by Councilmember Powell and seconded by Councilmember Sauer to approve this year's proposed tax rate as suggested in the motion. Any further questions or discussion from the council?
Mayor, I had a question. I was thinking that previous years, this wasn't actually, the first vote was not on approving the rate, but on approving the
max cap.
The intention or the setting the dates.
Yes, and that's Councilmember Hayes, that's correct. It's changed a little bit because of Senate Bill 2. It used to be a not to exceed rate. Now the law states that council needs to vote on a proposed rate, and then they need to schedule the public hearing associated with a property tax rate. And that was what we discussed back on that final slide, that will take place on September 8th. So it has changed. That was a very good point. It has changed from what we've done in prior years.
And that's just under the new law, Senate Bill 2, right, Laura?
Yes, ma'am.
So even though legislature had already made that law when we did budget last year, it wasn't effective until like September 1. And so last year's budget did not catch the new law, right?
Yes. That is correct. This is the first budget that it applies to, so we have to follow all the new Senate Bill 2 laws.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments related to the motion? Okay, all of those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. I see 5 hands. That passes with the 5-0 vote. Now we can move on to 3B, which is a public hearing and consideration of a 533.9 grant for the transit department. Mr. City Manager?
Yes, ma'am. This is we submit on a regular basis to present the item and or present the resolution rather, and answer any questions council might have. We have Director of Transit Marita Welch-Riley, and we will then have a public hearing. Marita?
Okay. I'm going to share my screen again. It was a little faster this time. This is asking you to conduct a public hearing in consideration of our fiscal year 5339 bus and bus facilities grant application to the U.S. Department of Transportation and TxDOT. The public hearing is to apply for these funds and to purchase fixed route buses. Now, the purchase of these fixed route buses will complete our fleet and make all our fleet to be current from 2017 models. And this purchase would be executed in fiscal year, completed in fiscal year 21, January 2021. And we are applying for $339,749 in federal assistance. Excuse me. And then we are asking for transportation development credits from TxDOT to match the funds, and that would be $67,950 as local match, in lieu of local match. And I'll put the beautiful bus back on the screen. So Mayor, we conduct the public hearing?
Yes, yeah. Before we do that, Council, any questions for Marita while she's still available? Okay, now let's do the public hearing. At this time, I'm going to open a public hearing on this matter. Any person who wishes to speak for, on, or against this matter may contact us by dialing in. I hope you've already dialed in, actually, and following the instructions that are in the agenda. Stephanie or Francis, do we have any callers waiting to comment on a public hearing?
If we have any attendees that wish to speak on this item, if you'll please click the raise hand button or dial *9 from your telephone at this time. If we do, Mayor, we'll give it about 10 seconds.
Sure.
I do not see anybody that wishes to speak on this item.
Okay, thank you. We'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
Yes, Mayor, I move to approve the resolution to submit a bus and bus facilities 5339 program grant application to the United States Department of Transportation in the amount of $339,749 and to the Texas Department of Transportation in the amount of $67,950 on behalf of the City of Amarillo.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Powell and second by Councilmember Smith. Any further questions or discussion from the council?
No, I just love Marita's comment that this will complete our fleet. That's very exciting.
Agreed. Okay, with that, all of those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. I see 5. That'll pass with a 5-0 vote. Thank you again, Marita. Item 3C is the consideration of a resolution of the City Council for the City of Amarillo setting a date, time, and place for a public hearing on the proposed annexation of certain property by the city. Mr. City Manager?
Mayor, we've been, for the last couple of years at council direction, we have been working when a annexation is requested to do an analysis in partnership with the developer request or the person requesting the annexation to assess financial viability of that. Really what we're saying is the city subsidizing an annexation, or is the development paying for itself? The reason why we're doing that, the reason council directed that, was to be able to have an understanding of the financial sustainability both of our current annexation practice or past annexation practices, along with the sustainability going forward of those annexations. One of the things that is apparent, especially with how annexations have gone historically and how our resources, our financial resources, have changed over time, is that our previous annexation practices were not financially sustainable. So that's why council directed staff to do those assessments, those analyses, in partnership again with the developers that were requesting the annexation. We've done that once before, and then we've done it. This is the second time. So to present the findings and to answer any questions you've got, of course, any staff member on the call will assist with those answers. But we've got Andrew Freeman, Director of Planning and Economic Development, or Managing Director of Planning and Economic Development, to present the annexation and also to answer any questions council might have. Andrew?
Let me pull my slides up real quick for you. Can everybody see those?
Yes.
Right. Okay, so this is the first step in the process as far as considering a landowner-initiated annexation, particularly with the legal changes that the legislature made as far as what a city can do. City can no longer annex a property. It has to be basically petitioned by the landowners for the most part. So the purpose of today's item, it is a resolution annexation request. So the resolution basically authorizes the city manager to execute a negotiated agreed service plan. And what that service plan does is really lays out the responsibilities both for the city and the landowner if the annexation is to take place. It also sets forward a time for the public hearing. So anyone interested in the project can come speak. The proposed development's 327 acres in southeast Amarillo. It's got planned 1,632 residential lots and approximately 31 acres of non-residential uses, commercial, office, for example. And the anticipated build-out period is 10 years, and that's what we use for the analysis that was included in your agenda packet. Here's just an outline of the area being proposed. You have Sundown to the north, Western to the east, and a future Bell extension to the west. And you can see the preliminary plan on the left side of the screen showing 12 different units of residential, and then the planned commercial on the northeast and northwest corners. Here's another aerial just from Google, a little more zoomed out so you can kind of see where it is in relation to Randall High School, Sundown Lane, and the Pinnacle development to the north. And then you have Loop 335 to the north as well. So again, on the agreed service plan, it does lay out the details of who's responsible for which parts of the annexation, as far as extending utilities out, what the developer has to build, the landowner has to build, as far as their project's concerned. It does not commit the city to annexation. That comes later with the ordinance and the public hearing next month if council moves forward with this request. So it is the first of 3 council actions in the process. As far as state law is concerned, it actually only requires 1 reading, but since our charter does require 2 for an ordinance, the second reading would not occur until late September. As far as the intent and purpose of annexation of the city's ETJ, it's to provide and protect areas for future growth and development in and around the city, promotes orderly growth and logical land development patterns when planning, long-range planning for development and planning for municipal services to serve those areas. It applies city codes and regulations that you may not see out in the county or ETJ related to maintenance standards, fire and construction codes, land use regulations, zoning, and subdivision. It also allows diversity of the city's economic base, creates job opportunities, new housing opportunities by having commercial, industrial, and residential development, depending on the area annexed. Some of the criteria we look at when evaluating annexation request, whether it's existing or planned development being considered for annexation, the need to protect public health, safety, and welfare, and then service needs of the areas proposed for annexation, as well as the fiscal impact that the city manager mentioned initially. So as far as the existing or planned development, when looking at the undeveloped areas adjacent to the city limits, that's where you want to decide the density as far as what's being considered in the immediate or near-term growth areas. If something's not in the city limits, it has to resort to water wells or septics or other means to have utilities, which usually limits the amount of density they can have in place compared to if they are on city services, they can put more dense development in this case, 1,600 homes compared to a few hundred homes. Also, you want to consider if you were to not annex the area, if you were to annex in the future, is it a barrier that keeps you from being able to annex if there's an opportunity in the future that the city council or the city wants to consider? Also, annexation with these barriers can result in piecemeal expansion, put a strain on the city's ability to provide those services, or can make it more expensive to provide those services in the future if a decision is made to annex. The need to protect public health, safety, and welfare, maintaining a safe living and working environment, providing those regulations mentioned earlier. This protects the development from inadequate design or construction standards that can be found in unincorporated areas, which can be important when the city is considering what's taking place on the edges of the city limits. It also helps prevent incompatible land uses. As you know, anything can be built in the county or the ETJ. There's no zoning regulations, so it can make it an unpredictable development pattern if the council were to try and annex and you're balancing, is it a right fit for the community, as opposed to now it's vacant open land with a plan what they're proposing versus something that's already in place. The next thing we look at is the service needs of the areas proposed for annexation. So we look at the municipal services provided from a residential, commercial, and industrial standpoint, and would it benefit the level of services for an urban area rather than a rural. It also defines future services related to boundaries and strategic expansion of service. So this takes into account our water and sewer plan, and are we able to accommodate future growth and development. It also lets us look at that system-wide approach versus a piecemeal approach. Does this extension of existing public infrastructure adversely impact existing service levels? So we want to look at and make sure we're not annexing new area to the detriment of our current users and current citizens, be able to make sure we can maintain those existing services and take on the additional responsibility. And then we also look at identifying service needs or deficiencies that allow the city to facilitate budgetary planning, making sure we can identify those and be able to take care of those in the future based on the revenue that it's bringing in. And then lastly, we touched on the fiscal impact. What are the anticipated costs and revenues associated with providing and maintaining the municipal services to the annexed area? This was providing your packet to give you an idea of the ad valorem and different fees that this development would produce versus the operation and maintenance costs and the CIP costs, capital improvement projects to serve the site. So we look at fiscal responsibility for the city limit expansion. We also want to ensure the area would benefit from its proximity to the city or contributing revenue to offset those costs of urban services. One thing to consider, particularly with this site, we do have a bond project from 2016 that's already developing Sundown, so it's directly adjacent to something the city's already investing in as far as that road, and is already benefiting from from that growth and development taking place on the city's part already through that bond election. You also look at the benefits, of course, population growth, whether it's sales tax, whether it's being able to qualify for more grants if the city overall population is growing, like we're experiencing now with the 2020 census. Depending on those results, it puts us into a different category as far as our eligibility for funding sources related to those criteria. And then we also look at, is the applicant proposing to mitigate or participate in costs associated with the annexation? Based on our current development policies, the city is responsible for a portion of the extension of utilities, upsizing of utilities, or a portion of the road. The developer has certain requirements themselves. And in this case, it is on the outer edge of a current zone protected by the fire department. So there is, if the city continues to annex and grow in this area, there would be a need for another fire station. So the developer in this case has also agreed to pay approximately $140,000 toward the construction of that new fire station. So that's something new that hasn't been included in past annexation agreements, and something to consider as far as the developer's willingness to participate in some of these costs related to this annexation.
And that contribution towards the fire station would accelerate the point in time at which we would be able to afford to pay for that fire station. All of the houses that are built outside our current service areas or outside the service areas of our mutual aid partners, in this case Randall County, would, until the new development in that area generates enough revenue to pay for the debt service, construction, and operation of the fire station, it's possible that if an ISO, an insurance service organization or standards organization, I forget the S, pardon me, but an ISO evaluation, which determines the insurance rates for areas. In our city, we have one of the lowest in the state, an ISO rating of 2. It's possible that if an ISO rating was done prior to the point in time at which the new development generated enough revenue to pay for the construction and operation of the fire station that would service that area, that we might have a split ISO rating. In other words, the city would have a 2, and then a small section of the city that's outside the 5-minute service areas of our existing fire stations would have 10. That's common in areas that expand, and it's also very common that those areas don't develop quickly enough to be able to build a fire station prior to the next ISO rating. So that is something to be aware of, but that will reduce the point in time. It will accelerate the point in time at which we would be able to afford, with the contribution from the developer and the revenue associated with the growth of the new development. It would accelerate the point in time at which we could afford to build and operate that new fire station to service that area.
And so that was really the final slide. This is really an opportunity to bring forth the agreed service plan, initiate the conversation with council, and kind of get your feedback, your questions, also in preparation of the public hearing that would take place in September if approved, to give us an opportunity to bring back any additional information you might have on this request. But if approved today, the public hearing would go on September 8th, and then second reading would be September 22nd. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you might have.
Council, any questions for Andrew? Okay, then do we have a motion to set the dates for this timeline?
Yes, Mayor. I move to approve the resolution to consider allowing the city manager to formalize an agreed service plan related to a landowner-initiated annexation request in the vicinity of Beacon Point, which is southwestern and west Sundown Lane.
Okay.
It's been moved by Councilmember Powell and seconded by Councilmember Smith to approve a resolution that would formalize the agreed service plan and the time and the dates included in that plan for this process to move forward. Any questions or comments from the council? Okay, hearing none, all of those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, that's 5 votes for. So that item passes with a 5-0 vote.
Mayor would also add that this will be a good opportunity for us to. We are already working with Randall County and with the City of King, and have had very preliminary conversations with persons over at Potter County to have a common development standard to include ways to having financially sustainable, facilitating financially sustainable development throughout our 2-county footprint, so that we and other jurisdictions don't continue to have challenges or shortfalls on annexation and the associated costs for, primarily it's associated costs for very large ticket items like drainage, like roads, like water and wastewater, things like that. So this will be a good time to, if council is on board with, kick off a evaluation of how we can, as a 2-county area, specifically for us though, as a city of Amarillo, have a philosophy and a plan in place that will facilitate and encourage development while also making sure that it is financially sustainable for the city and for all of our taxpayers.
Jared, is that something we could get on a work session agenda in the next 2 or 3?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can put it on there, and I'll work with you to schedule that and work it in a way that it's something we can focus on while we're also going through this evaluation that we're talking about right now, but also all the steps that we need to take to finalize the budget for next fiscal year. But we can get that on there very, very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Okay, item 3D is to consider the appointments for the Community Development Advisory Committee. We've been working on this for a while to get the requirements changed so that we could expand the number and different types of people that could serve on this committee. So, Jared, I've handed over to you.
Right, and I'm going to very quickly hand it over to Jason Riddlesberger, our Interim Director of Community Development, to walk us through this item. I know that our previous director, Juliana Kitten, was very instrumental in initiating the process to simplify this, what was a very cumbersome and complicated, confusing even process. So, but Jason is the person that's going to carry us across the line, and was also involved throughout the whole time with Juliana. So, Jason, take it away.
Thank you, sir. So we are requesting the council to appoint 4 new members to the Community Development Advisory Committee. We have 3 sitting members that their term runs through the end of the year. Of those 4 vacancies, 2 of the applicants are from the target area. So in order for us to meet the requirements, we have to have 4 total in the target area. So 2 of those that are currently seated, Mildred Darton and Ginger White, are both in the target area. And of our 14 applications, only 2 of those were from the target area. And those are Edna Neal and Glenda Grisham. So we're kind of, we've got to appoint those 2, being that they fulfill our need to have 4 in the target area. And that leaves us with 2 other vacancies that can be from at large. So those are basically the 2 that we're looking for recommendations and appointments to our committee.
Do you have individuals that you are recommending for those spaces?
Of those 2, so the 2 that I mentioned before from the target area, Edna Neal and Glenda Grisham. And then it would be our recommendation. We have an application from former council member Lilia Escajeda. Very good recommendation there. And then we've worked very closely with Deputy Professor from the social work department, Meg DeJong Shire. She's been very closely working with us in a lot of our PIT counts, very active as far as providing interns to both CIT, the Coming Home program. So she's been a very good advocate for the community development and other agencies.
Were they included in our packet somewhere and I just missed them?
They are included in your packet, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was a separate, kind of a separate packet.
Okay, it's not on that main one.
No, ma'am.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason. We appreciate that. Council, what we need to do now is discuss those other two, let's call them spots 6 and 7. Staff is making a recommendation of two potential candidates. Anybody else want to make a recommendation? Lots of good people on the list.
Yes, there is. I know we didn't receive an application from Mary Emily, but I know that she has an interest in serving as well. But from what I can see is we have the 2 target areas covered with Miss Neal and then also Miss Grisham. And then I know that, I certainly know that Lilia Estejeda would be a good candidate for this board, as well as Miss Shire. So I'm good with those, the 4 that have been mentioned.
Mayor, can I suggest maybe that we do 2 separate nominations and go ahead and nominate Miss Neal and Miss Grisham because those are specific that have to fit, and then the others are out at large, if I'm following that correctly.
Would you like to make a motion about Miss Neal and Miss Grisham?
Yes, Mayor, I move to appoint Edna Neal and Glenda Grisham for an appointment on the Community Development Advisory Committee for places 4 and 5.
Second.
So there's a motion made by Councilmember Hayes, seconded by Councilmember Powell, to appoint Edna Neal and Glenda Grisham to the CDBG Community Development Advisory Committee in the 2 places that are target area specific. Any questions or discussion from the rest of the council on that motion? Okay, all of those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, that passes with a 5-0 vote. So what we have left to decide then are places 6 and 7 that are at-large places.
So then some of the names that are on the list, were these names submitted by council members? Did they submit an application previously to serve on this committee?
These individuals put their own applications in to be appointed to the committee. So these were from these individuals.
Right. And they were included.
Hayes, it's a combination of recent applications as we have opened this up for the last 2 weeks, and the previous applications that the city secretary maintained from last fall's application process. So the current applicants are a combination of those 2, all of which have been received by the city secretary.
Ms. Powell, did you have a comment or a question?
No, I was just saying that the applications were included with the packet as well.
I'd like to speak in favor of Ms. Farron, Nancy Farron. Definitely have been involved with her in multiple activities over the years, and she is all in on whatever she serves on, and I know that she would be quite a powerful voice on that committee.
Thank you. Do you know, or Jason, has Nancy been serving on any of the point in time counts or working with community development in any way? I mean, those are It's not required for her to serve on that committee. I'm just curious.
No, Nancy Farron. So.
Okay. I do know her. She's a delightful person, and I agree with Councilwoman Hayes' assessment of her as far as her work ethic and dedication to our community. Anybody else have someone they want to make a comment on? I know Buddy Poole, Danita Bynum, Kara Gilbert, Maddie Bean, all of them great people. I would tell you guys that Kara Gilbert is on my list of people for Task Force for Greatness, which we hope to have back to you soon. So I would rather not have her appointed to this committee, but leave her as a potential to be appointed to that committee.
And I'm in favor of Jason's recommendation, so I'm good with the individuals that he has mentioned.
Gentlemen, comments before we have a motion, unless somebody wants to jump in with a motion.
No.
Okay. I always think this is one of the most challenging things we do as a council. And obviously, the reason we're doing this now is because this committee structure changed. We changed the rules around it, and it's been short members ever since we appointed people last November. So if you're a citizen wondering why we're doing committee appointments in August, it's not that we're moving away from our general policy to appoint them all together in one meeting in November. We just have had some struggle on this committee getting people in those positions and keeping them there. And so this change that we've made in how we build this committee opened it up, and we needed to go ahead and get these places appointed. Do we have a motion?
Yes, Mayor. I move to appoint Lilia Escajeda and Margaret Shire as at-large members to the Community Development Advisory Committee.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to appoint Lilia Escajeda and Margaret DeJong Shire to the places 6 and 7. Any further discussion or questions from the council? Hearing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, we've got 5 votes in favor of that. Thank y'all very much for getting those appointments made. And Jason, we look forward to hearing about the work that committee's going to do.
Thank you so much. We will.
That brings us to the end of our non-executive session agenda. So at this time, I'd ask the city attorney to read our special language so we can move into executive session.
Yes, ma'am. Pursuant to the Texas Open Meetings Act, closed session of the Amarillo City Council was announced on August the 25th, 2020 at 3:13 p.m. under the following authority. Section 551.072 to discuss the purchase, exchange, sale, lease, or value of real property. Public discussion of such would not be in the best interest of the city's bargaining position.
Thank you. At this time, we'll adjourn into executive session. Appreciate all of you.